Most small entrepreneurs try and get customers to make sales. Bigger entrepreneurs try to make sales to get customers. And the difference is one person is all about trying to get to the money as fast as possible. What do I need to say to get this person to say yes? What do I need to say to get this person to buy, right? How do I get the money? The other way is how do I make some sort of exchange so that I can now create a long-time relationship with this customer and continue to provide value over time? One has a compounding view and perspective on time and value, and the other is short-sighted. And I can tell you the difference between the people who are millionaires that I'm friends with and people who are billionaires that I'm friends with. This is probably one of the most fundamental differences. And so I was talking to a friend of mine who's north of $1 billion, and he was saying, if it's not going to grow on its own over time, it's not worth doing. And I really sat with that for a second, and it was like, if you put in a one-time effort, this is how people who are the ultra-wealthy think. If you put one-time effort into something and it compounds over time, then that is an enterprise or a product that they want to continue to invest in. On the flip side, if you have to consistently show up and consistently promote and consistently get out there and sell and do all this stuff, then what ends up happening is that the product itself is not good enough, right? Because people in and of themselves are not referring business.
Need motivation?
Watch a top 10 with Believe Nation.
Hey, it's Evan Carmichael, and I make these videos because in my first business, I quit on my business partner. I was making $300 a month, and I didn't have the motivation to keep going. And the thing that got me through was studying the stories of entrepreneurs who've had massive success. And I hope that in sharing these stories with you, you find a motivation to keep going. And if I'm being honest, I still need the stories for myself today too. So today, let's learn from one of the best, Alex Hormozi, and my take on his top 10 rules of success. Enjoy.
Let me give you 3 questions that really changed and hopefully will alter your perspective like they did mine around product and service. And so the first is, if I have an existing product or service and I were to make it 10 times more expensive, so really think about the price. So, or you can say $100,000 or $1 million, whatever it is, right? Just huge number. And if that's how much I were charging for it, what would I need to do? What would the experience need to be? What would the product need to deliver in order for it to be worth that much? What happens is you start thinking in a very different type of mindset about how much value you have to create, right? And so that is the first question that I ask. There's 2 more, and the third one's my favorite, and I'll get to in a second. The second question I ask is, if this product that I have cost 1/10 as much as it does right now, but I had to make it better than it currently is, what would I need to do? What one-time assets would I need to create that would consistently provide value that I could do at scale, that I could do profitably? Right? So first question, if this were 10 times as expensive or $100,000 or $1 million is what I charge for my product, what would it need to be? What would the experience need to be? And what value would I need to deliver in order for it to be worth that much? The second question is, if it were 1/10 the cost, but I had to make it better than my current product or service, what else would I create or do or make in order to facilitate that outcome? And the third question, which is probably my favorite, which I think underpins the entire ideology that I'm hitting on here, is if I had a business and I were only allowed to sell one more customer, and the rest of the growth of my business had to come from that customer without me asking, as in that customer's experience was so remarkable, was so positive, was so amazing, that they alone had to, on their own volition, tell other people about my service, what would need to happen? What would need to happen to create that experience? And when thinking about all 3 of these product frames, I like them because they kind of hit on different aspects of the product. The first question, which is the $100,000 or the $1 million question, hits on value, which is how do I create the most value in the product itself? The second question hits on the profit of the product, because if it's 1/10 the cost and I have to make it better, this means that I have to do high margin, one-time investment type things to make the entire product more valuable, right? So that hits on profit. So first is the value of the product. The second is the profit to me, right, as a business owner. And then the third question hits on the experience, which is what's the customer experience, which is everything else that surrounds the product that we're selling or service that we're selling, right? What is the experience that has to occur in order for this customer to become a raving fan, that it's so good that they remark about it. They cannot help themselves but remark about it. And what's interesting is that every super wealthy person that I know pretty much exclusively talks about product. And usually the really small people that I know only talk about promotion. And promotion should really only exist to get your product right. And then once it is right, then you can juice it and then let it go and take care of itself. And the reason that it's so important, at least in my opinion, is that if you think about the 6 ways of getting customers, right? And if you don't know what those are, it's paid media, Earned media. So paid media is advertising, right, and promotions. Earned media is followings, right, if you have any kind of organic following. The third is through your contact list, so people on your phone and your email list, et cetera, that you already own their contact information. The fourth is through manual outbound, so that's DMs, cold emails, cold calls, cold all of that stuff where you reach out to people. The fifth is through affiliates, so partners who can promote your stuff. And the sixth, which is the most powerful and the only one that compounds, is word of mouth. So think about that for a second. Every of the other 5 ways of acquiring customers is not compounding. Those are linearly scaled, right? It means if you double the amount of outbound people you have, you double the amount of customers that you get. If you double your ad spend, you might be able to double the amount of customers you get. Sometimes it's less than that, but you get the idea. They scale relatively linearly, right? Whereas word of mouth, referrals, which is the 6th way of getting customers, is the only one that compounds. It multiplies rather than is additive. All right, if you get 2 people to tell 2 people and those people tell 2 people, then it continues to compound. And that is what creates enterprise value. That is what creates an enduring thing. And that is what, when you spend the extra time to make the product so good that people have to tell their friends about it, then that's where you get the unending scale. And also is where all the profit is, right? You don't have to worry about the churn as much because the product's so good. You don't have to worry about the negative reviews because the product's so good. You don't have to worry about customers bad-mouthing you because instead they're telling their friends about how good you are. And this has been one of the shifts that has been most helpful for me. And honestly, when I look back on my own trajectory, how much I talk about promotion in the beginning of my career versus now I talk so much more about people and product. The real nuts of this is that everything that the ultra wealthy do is compounding. It grows with time, where time becomes an asset instead of a liability. And if everything you do, you have to go out and get more business, go out and get more business, go out and get more business, right? It means that it requires effort every single day. Whereas if you put a lot of front-end effort, which is the investment, which is the patience, right, to make the thing that much better in the beginning, then it will pay you in dividends over time. And most people skip that step because they just want to make the first sale. They're just trying to get a customer to make a sale rather than trying to make a sale to get a customer.
Rule number 2, focus on your niche.
There was a tweet by Layla, my wife. She said, stop listening to people about how to play the game who've never been anywhere but the sidelines. And the problem is, too many of the people who are watching this right now, y'all are on the sidelines and have always been on the sidelines and are trying to pick a niche to get into to sell how to do the niche. Well, that's dumb. You've never done it. So a lot of times people are trying to skip to a higher leverage opportunity without having done the requisite work of understanding the niche, which is why the Y Combinator people look for, if you want to make a software in the payment space, we'd love to see that you have experience in the payment space, because there's so much stuff that you don't know that you know when you actually spend 3-5 years doing something in an industry. You understand the lingo, you understand the avatar, you understand the problems, and you can see opportunities if you have an entrepreneurial hat on. There's always problems in every industry, which means there's always opportunity. And fundamentally, business is just solving problems that exist and making sure the math makes sense. That's literally it. It's where is there a problem? How much do they think this is a problem? And is there a way that I can solve it and charge for it? That's it. That's really all that business is. And really, how well you solve the problem is going to dictate how much virality your business has, because if you solve it really well, people will tell people and your business will grow, right? I think the problem that a lot of people have is they didn't know how to make an offer, right? Is the fundamental thing that is the beginning of building a business, is you got to know what you're selling. And so that was a problem for a lot of people. And then people got that problem solved, and then they told their friends, and the book sold 100,000 copies in 6 months with no promotion. And so I'm sharing this because I couldn't write a book on offers without having made a ton of offers. And I feel like there's too often people who are trying to focus on a niche who've never actually done the thing in the niche. And this is really, really rampant in the internet space because everyone's trying to take a shortcut to get there when they realize, when I'm telling you right now, you're never going to get there because you're not good enough. You're never going to get there because you're not good enough. You have to do the rocky cutscene. You have to eat the for a period of time so that you can get the reps in, so you can put your time under the bar in, so that you can actually get good. And before you are good, you will suck. And you have to accept a long period of sucking, and you do enough volume that eventually you'll suck so little that you'll actually be good. And then at that point, then you'll actually have a real decision to make, which is, I'm actually really good at this thing now that I've learned. Do I want to teach it to other people, or just want to do more of the thing that I'm doing, right? Because a realtor can then just grow a team of 100 realtors and own the entire thing, which is what I'd recommend this guy do, right? Rather than have an agency that does it, right? And so this is kind of where I think the problem is that I had another question that was sent to me on Instagram, which is hey, how do I solve churn? Because a lot of my clients aren't getting results. And I'm like, well, duh. He said, how do I scale from 10,000 to 100,000 a month when I don't have a lot of testimonials? I was like, You're not good at the thing that you're supposed to be good at. It's why you don't have testimonials. It's why you're not going $100,000 a month. Like, he's making the goal $100,000 a month rather than being good. I have no words. I have no words. I don't get it. You know what I mean? Like, everyone's in such a rush that you will never get there. It is the slowest path to getting there is to fool yourself into thinking that you're good at something that you're not. You have to go and pull the thread and say, and the thing is like, well, do what you're passionate about. Whatever. You're not going to be passionate about stuff that you suck at. What you have to do is like, which of these opportunities seem like they potentially have high leverage, and I'm going to learn from the bottom, right? It's like one of the best ways to learn stuff is starting at the bottom, not because it's the only option, but because if you understand the entire pathway of a client journey or of an industry journey, then you will have more trench knowledge, more depth of experience that you will be then able to apply. People see my, videos on personal finance. People see videos of mine on sales. People see videos on mine recruiting. People see videos of mine of marketing. And it's like, how did you acquire all these skills? It's because it's not like because I tried to jump to the spot that I'm at. You can't skip. Like, there's a sequence. Buildings are built with foundations, and your career is a pyramid, and the peak of that pyramid is based on the depth of the foundation that you build. And so, like, I've said this before, and I'll say it again, but your work works on you more than you work on it. And so even though you might not be getting paid in the period that you're at, just because you're struggling doesn't mean you're failing. And the thing is, as long as you're getting better, you're making progress, and the progress is the success, is that you are getting better. And like, you will turn the corner. Like, that's an inevitability if you put enough time in.
Rule number 3, know the problem.
There are a lot of different things that come up in the business world where I will see people conflate or mistake what thing they are solving, right? And most times when I'm talking to a newer entrepreneur or even a more established entrepreneur and they reach out for help or guidance or whatever, right? Or it's one of our portfolio companies, most times they'll start talking, right, really fast about all this stuff to try and provide context. And I'll just usually pause them and be like, what problem are we solving? It usually gets them to stop, right? And I would highly advise you, if you have subordinates or you have direct reports who roll into you and they have a whole bunch of decisions, a lot of times you can get caught, and sometimes ourselves too, we can get caught in the day-to-day, the minutia, and just simply pause and say, what problem are we solving? There's so many pieces of this that I want to unpack that I think are going to be really interesting for you. But the first one is, when you define what problems you are solving, you might even have to ask the question, is there a problem? When some people are like, well, hey, we're getting, customer service complaints. It's like, okay, understood. Is this something that we believe that we can reasonably eliminate? Is this something that is catastrophic to the business, or is this something that we can kind of try and improve over time, through systems and process, right? And so a lot of times people misprioritize problems because they perceive them as threats to existence, when in reality they are a course of doing business and things that we can consistently improve, right? Especially if you're newer. You're starting out, of course your product's not going to be perfect yet, right? You're just getting going. But you improve these things rather than thinking, I have to stop everything to fix this problem, right? And so the first frame shift is that most people think in terms of like, I have a problem to solve rather than a dichotomy to be managed, as in these are two things that will always exist. All right, I'll give you a different example of this. Actually, this will be a fun one. The reason we will probably never have people who are all happy about a tax code is because you cannot have both fairness and equality. Equality means everyone pays 10%. Fairness means the rich people pay more than the poor people. That's fair. This is equal. Both are ideals. And yet, somehow they're not the same thing. And yet both are right. And so because of that, we will always have this conflict. It's the same thing between justice and mercy. Both of them are ideals. Both of them are right. And yet somehow they're conflicting. And so we see these situations, and this is why I'm trying to hopefully give this to you, because the more I started to recognize these patterns, the more quickly I could recognize them and then identify them and then either dismiss them or say, oh, it's another one of those, right? It's a pattern recognition. It's like, oh, you guys are spending all this effort trying to solve a problem that is unsolvable. This is a dichotomy that must be managed and will never be eliminated. And so I think my goal with this video is, if I can help you get out of these little mental hamster wheels, it's been incredibly valuable for me. All right. So that's the dichotomy. That's like one of the things that people will mistake. They'll mistake a dichotomy for a problem that needs to be solved. All right. Another framework that I find immensely valuable is the concept of a continuum versus a binary. All right. This is probably one of the biggest mental errors that people make when they're trying to identify things. And this is what I mean by that. So, for example, I might say, I'll use a weight loss example. So people will say something like, I am off my diet or I'm on my diet, right? It's a very simple thing. And that's because psychologically we like to be binary. We like to label things as yes or no. But biology and reality exist on continuums, as in, to what extent did you go off of your diet, right? Did you go 200 calories over? Did you go 500 calories over? And even though it is, quote, more difficult to think in this way, it is also more accurate. And so our brain uses binaries as placeholders for decision making to store data, right? When in reality, when you start storing all these binary decisions, they start adding up and you start getting more and more inaccurate, if that's a word, on your decision making process, because you're actually basing your decisions not on facts, but based on binary shorthand that your brain saves. And so that is one of the biggest mistakes that I see all the time in thinking in entrepreneurs and really in anything in general, because we like to have that shorthand. It is easier, right? It's easier to say, I fell off my diet, or I am diabetic, when the reality is, it's not whether you are diabetic, it's how diabetic are you, right? Kind of interesting. I stole that from Dr. Cashew, but I just love that. Who's my closest friend? He's a biochemist, and we talk about this stuff all the time. Point being, if you can think about this within, I'll give you a business example. So if we have a binary where people are saying yes or no, which is, let's say, Facebook doesn't work. Marketing doesn't work. I hear these statements all the time, and you may laugh at this, right? But I get DMs like this all the time. Facebook doesn't work for me. Marketing doesn't work for me. Like, you can't sell this way in my business, right? And so people want to shorten a problem into yes, it works, no, it doesn't work, when so much of business and problem solving is understanding the nuance between where we're starting and where we're going. And it's to what extent has Facebook not worked, right? Where is the fall off? Right? It is not that it doesn't work. It is just we only got it to work this percent. Right? Now we need to get all the way over the hump to get there, but it's to what extent. And I think that if you can ask the right questions, if you can see the problems as they truly are, they become far more solvable. And so this has been probably, I just gave you two of my best frames that I think with all the time. All right, so I'll say these again. So the first mental lapse, I'll say, that I see all the time is mistaking a dichotomy that needs to be managed for a problem that needs to be solved. People do this in their marriages as well, right? So you look at your wife, right? You look at your wife and you're like, I need more variety, right? But later you're like, I need more consistency. And you're like, we have to figure this out. We need variety. We need consistency. It's like, yes, you need both, right? And so it's not a problem to be solved. It's a dichotomy to be managed.
Rule number 4, start simple.
In a perfect world, if everyone had absolute information and everyone was unbelievably well trained and you had a great infrastructure and all that stuff, then yes, the more products and services you offer, in theory, you would make more money. But we don't live in that theoretical world most of the time, and most small business owners are not that good at operating, right? It's the number one issue they have. They're super disorganized. They feel like they're spinning their wheels all day. Their team completely has no idea which way they're going. They change things all the time, etc. And so in an effort to combat that, we have used this process over and over again, and it has worked very well. So it is as follows. We sell two things, and I've done this in virtually every business that I've ever owned. We sell two things. 2 products or 2 services, and this is once we're going from 1 to 10 million. All right, 0 to 1 million, you sell 1 product or 1 service, 1 avatar. All right, that's it. 1 channel, 1 product, 1 avatar. That's it. All right, but once you're going from 1 to 3-ish million, and you're trying to go to 10, you introduce the second product line. And so here's how this works. If you have 2 things that you sell, you'll have a front end thing and you'll have a back end thing. We can still have a massive accommodation in the buying curve based on the payment terms that we introduce. So for example, people will look at their monthly expense more than the total contract value. That's a huge money hack. I'm giving you right now. This is a wealth hack. This is something that will make you a fortune in your life if you can properly understand this. People do not look at the length or the total contract they're signing. They will only pay attention to what is it going to cost me every month, because no one is good with their money. All right, so they only look at the cash flow expense month over month over month, and they just think, can I make it happen? Yes, cool, I'll sign. They don't think about the total contract value. For you as a business owner, the contract value matters almost more than anything. So I'll give you a quick hack on this. Total side note, tangent for you, life hack. Pro tip, if you want to extend the contract value that you have, I have a saying, which is the bigger the head, the longer the tail. All right. And so what that means is the more you can get someone to pay up front, and relative to the upfront cost of signing up or what they paid down, the lower their contractual recurring payment is, the stickier it will be. So I'll give you an example. If I had someone sign up for $99 a month for whatever, it doesn't matter, that price point Might be medium sticky depending on the value that I have. Now imagine I had someone pay $5,000 down and $99 a month after that. How much more sticky would it be? Significantly more sticky. Now, the beauty is if you have one of these upfront type payments, you can also use that to liquidate your ad costs, cover your commissions for the salesperson, cover the upfront fulfillment and onboarding, which is going to cost more for a new customer than an existing customer. And so you can build all that in. If you know that the thing that you are selling has very high gross margins, then you can still have a lower cost as long as you know that the person is going to stay for a long time. And so based on how you structure the pricing, you can actually you can use the pricing to actually get people to stick longer. Pro tip complete. That is it. Moving back to the original thing that I was talking about. In one of our portfolio companies, we actually had this as a really in-depth discussion that we had to make a decision about, all right? And so they had a different, mentor, person, whatever, advice, who told them that they should have 3 products. And they should have a low, a medium, and a high product. And then based on, what the salesman thought, the salesman would sell them the low, medium, or high. In my experience, it is not that effective. And that is because the salesperson can't decide which of these things they're trying to sell most of the time. And so what we have found is more effective is you give the salesperson the one dream to sell. This thing is going to solve this person's problem, and we make it the most valuable thing that we're trying to sell, because at the end of the day, you do want to solve the customer's problem, right? We do want to actually make sure that we're providing value. Rather than having a diet, a medium, and a great, right? Simply having one thing that solves all the problems, and then based on the customer's budget, we can decrease how they pay, all right? So hear me out. So let's say that we want to do this is a 6-month implementation of whatever kind of solution you sell. If you have a 6-month duration, you can have the person A, pay the entire thing up front. So that would be for somebody who has the highest budget. Version 2 would be a split pay. Version 3 might be 3 payments, right, at 20% higher. And then finally, you might have a 6 pay or whatever over that period of time. So 1, 2, 3, 6. Now, here's the cool thing. The more payment options you provide, the higher your conversions are. That's proven, all right? So the more options you give someone to pay, the more people will buy, period. Now, you might not make more cash flow because if you give your sales guy more options, then they'll end up defaulting to the lower ones, right? But if you have one thing to sell, then they only have one thing to convince the person of, because a confused mind doesn't buy. If you have too many options, the salesman won't know what to sell and the prospect won't know what to buy. And so I prefer, when I'm coming into a portfolio company, I'm thinking, what is this true problem that we are solving with this business? For what avatar? And we make that the main thing, and we communicate it clearly in the scripting, and the salesperson has clarity on what they are selling, and they're always solving the same thing. And so the question becomes no longer which of these things are you going to buy, but once you are buying, how would you like to pay? And so then the discussion is around what payment plan is best for them rather than what product is best for them. And so by doing that, you can get people to go between different payment terms. That is not going to change whether they're going to buy. But if they're unsure about which product is going to best suit their needs, and the salesman doesn't know, because at the end of the day, he's just trying to sell the most expensive thing, then you'll have way more confused people who leave unsold. So this is a single tactic that you can use to execute within your business, which is why I'm a big fan of making offers people cannot say no to, is that you can focus all of your sales and all of your persuasion attempts on selling the one thing, which is getting them to say yes. Once they say yes, we can accommodate their wealth and their budget based on the payment terms that we provide. And if we have structured our offer properly, the offer in and of itself should already be very high gross margins, which means whether or not the person pays $1,000 a month or $100 a month, it's still almost all margin for us because of how we structure the thing that we are selling. And so we are able to capture higher LTVs by getting the people who have more money to prepay the thing up front. That is how we do it. And with those people, you'll be able to ascend into the second thing faster because they've already prepaid that thing. And then you can solve the next natural problem in another sales conversation rather than trying to pick all of the things in one conversation, which makes it incredibly difficult to do. This is, just for everyone, again, a broad brushstroke of statements for most entrepreneurs who are not very good at operating their businesses, or operations is not their strong suit, and are below $3 million a year.
Also, to make sure you're actually taking action after watching this video, I've designed a special free worksheet just for this video. The worksheet will highlight all of the lessons learned in this video, as well as pull out our 3 favorite learnings and quotes that will inspire you to actually do something. The worksheet will also give you space to write down what your key takeaways are and your specific plan of action to make sure you're getting results. If you want the worksheet designed specifically for this video, absolutely for free, there's a link in the description below. Go click on it and start building the momentum in your life and your business. I'll see you there. Rule number 5, ask the right questions.
I say this because all of us, right? I do this all the time, right? And this is going to be a repeated theme because it needs to be repeated, right? We need to be reminded more than we need to be taught. That is a saying that we have in my world, and I will pass it on to you guys, Hormozi Nation. We need to be reminded more than we need to be taught. Do the boring work, repeat successful actions. And so if he's gotten to this point, or if you've gotten to a point in your business and it has plateaued, the question is, has it plateaued because this is true? Like the only reason a business should plateau that is reasonable, that is not your fault, is that you have reached the total addressable market, as in you have saturated the total market of that thing. So for example, if you were selling dog food and every dog within this, maybe you sell a specific type of niche of poodle food, right? You've gotten, 70% of poodle owners to buy your food and you can't grow any more beyond that, right? Well, that would be reasonable, but then you'd obviously just do a different type of dog, right? You'd hop verticals, right? So there's not even a reason, but it would be the only potentially rational reason would be that your market has changed. So a different example is a friend of mine owns a company that does newspaper advertising. All right, so they actually help newspapers translate their advertisements into digital products, which is pretty cool. So they are able to sell basically a whole new ad product to small businesses who want to buy ads, right? Which is, by the way, how newspapers make money. He could not grow his business because newspapers have shrunk by 25% year over year, which is 25% compounding the wrong direction. And he's been in that business for like 10 years. So now the market size is literally 5% of what it used to be 10 years ago. And so as a result of that, he was growing at an inverse rate to the shrinkage of the industry, right? And so he got to a point where he couldn't grow any more than just basically servicing the ones that are still alive. And then as they fell, so did his business, right? And so that is the only logical reason that a business can plateau that is not in your control. And unless you're selling to newspapers, which you're probably not, the reason is much simpler, which is you just don't know how. And I'll tell you a different story that I had, and then I'll wrap this up at the end. So I was having a different conversation with a woman who was doing, I think, $4 million a year. And she was selling info products that were weight loss. So like weight loss info products. So like programs and ebooks and things like that, which is cool, right? She has a big following, all that kind of stuff. And I did a podcast with her, and after we got off the podcast, she was like, yeah, so these are my plans. I'm going to be doing an apparel line and a supplement line and a cream line and a whatever, right? And I just kind of sat there and I was like, well, I think it's a terrible idea. She just looked at me cross-eyed. She's like, what? And I was like, yeah, I think it's a terrible idea. And she was like, oh. And I was like, why don't you just take the thing that's making you $4 million and make you $10 million? Why don't you do that? And the answer is the same as the first answer. I just don't know how. And I was like, right, well, why don't we solve that problem and then not create a new business? Why don't we just put all of our effort into solving that problem? And so I'm a big believer, and this is the piece that I want to share with you, Hormozi Nation, is that I'm a big believer in the theory of constraints, which means that a system will grow until it is constrained, right? It has a constraint, and then once you remove the constraint, it will continue to grow, right, until it reaches another constraint. And so most people are always curious, or many people ask me, hey, Alex, how did you achieve, quote, so much in, quote, such little time or at such a young age? And I say all that in quotes because so much could be and young age, whatever. But I'm paraphrasing, right? And I think that one of the things that we have done well is prioritizing what problems to solve. And that is understanding the prioritization of problems and realizing that there is really only typically one or two things that are constraining our growth. And by definition, there'd really only be one thing that's the constraint until we reach another thing that might be beginning to constrain us, but isn't the true constraint yet.
Rule number 6, have the smarts and the hearts.
What it was setting the tone. And the reason that my views on business have dramatically shifted is that I have always had a tendency to lean towards strategy, acquisition, monetization, pricing structures, and all of that stuff is important. But I think within a business, there are two components to it. You've got the smarts and you've got the hearts, and you have to have both. And I think that most people overestimate the importance of smarts, myself included. And I think that there's a lot to do with the hearts, because business strategy overarchingly is not that complex. But like, you really think about it, right? It's like, you got to find something that's good, that people want, and you sell it for a lot more than it costs you to do it, and you do as much of that as you possibly can. Like, that's kind of the idea, right? And the thing is it gets lost in the execution. It gets lost in the doing, right? As soon as you hire your first employees, you're like, no, employees can't do what I can do. It's like, well, that's a horrible belief. You should probably change that before you try and move forward. That's a limiting belief, right? If you want to have a big business. And so when I think about this from a cultural standpoint, and this is what has shifted for me, is that it's become so much more about the soft skills. It's so much more about coaching and developing the leaders of the company. It's so much more about addressing behavioral dynamics of someone that are limiting them, more so than it is about tinkering. And I can't help but think that so many entrepreneurs, myself included, I spent so much time tinkering and tweaking things. What if we change this in our sales process? What if we change this on this page? What if we change the offer like this? What if we change this on the pricing? What if we change the payment terms? Blah, 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 blah. All these different things, right? And think about this for a second for yourself. How many things have you tinkered with in your business over the last however many years, how many months, and your business hasn't changed at all, right? Because the real problem is not the strategy. The problem is not the smarts, right? The problem is the heart, right? The people are not doing what you want them to do because they don't understand why they need to do it and why it's important, right? And that's the soft stuff. And you've got, people who don't want to talk to each other because they don't like each other because one guy's really annoying. And so it's like, it would better serve you to fix that problem than to try and come up with some new strategy, right? Realizing that has been one of the biggest breakthroughs that I've had in my career. Those two stories should illustrate the difference between having a championship mentality and having a loser mentality and what might be going on in your business. And I'll leave you with one more story really quickly. So if any of you has ever been on a championship team, right? If you've ever played in a sports arena or whatever, and you've been on a winning team, you've been on a losing team, right? And you've probably been on a losing team that had a lot of good players, but you guys were not connected, you weren't concerted, you weren't aligned, right? On the flip side, you had a winning team, and it was like everyone showed up to practice, everyone, tried their hardest. It was the effort and the consistency and the alignment of the team that accomplished the goal. The rules are the same. Everyone was trying to do the exact same thing. And so when you think about the entire business landscape, right? Your competitors have access, more or less, to the same talent pool that you do. They can see what your strategy is overall, and most people are not that dumb, right? And so as long as you have a relatively sound strategy, like you're not selling things at a loss, right? Then the difference between the two is going to be your ability to execute and have people execute on your behalf. And so that's going to become like for us as CEOs, we do shift towards becoming championship team coaches, which is why John Wooden, if he had run a business, would have had a championship business because he focused on the fundamentals. And one of my favorite sayings of all time is, advanced people never don't do the basics. Advanced people never don't do the basics. I would go to these stages and I would watch guys get on stage and they'd say, we follow up with all of our leads, within 5 minutes. When we get on sales calls, we always ask them why they're there. We label them a problem. We overview some of the past things they've done, and then they follow a clear framework. And then as soon as someone buys, we have a good onboarding process. And nothing they say is revolutionary. It's just that they actually do it, and the people are actually on their behalf. They're not the Vince, or don't have a manager like Vince, who's telling them that they shouldn't have to do that work, right? Who's sabotaging the business. What they did is they set the tone, and then they carry the bar. And so their job is to be intolerant of anything but excellence and to reinforce that in the culture so that it's consistently executed across the company. Because that, between two companies with the same strategy, will make the difference between somebody who yields disproportionate returns on advertising, crazy profits, good growth, great retention on employees, low turnover, from a company that doesn't have that, right? Even though they both have the same strategy, or even if the smaller company has the better strategy, this guy will win. And this has been one of the most profound shifts that I've had.
Rule number 7, find the right partner.
If you're just starting out, I think that for the most part, it's better to not have partners. And that is because usually it's like you and a buddy and you're like, hey, we like hanging out, we should go into business together. When really you're doing that for the emotional need to be satisfied, to have somebody to talk to and share the experience with, but not because it's a good business decision. And the only reason for you to have a partner is because they either have money or skills that you do not have. That is it. It's the only reason. Money or skills. That's it. And so if you both are entrepreneurial people and you're both, love selling and love marketing and you're very promotion oriented, which many entrepreneurs are, right? If that's you, then if they're that way too, then one of you is not required. And you have to really face that. So if you both like the same stuff, you both shouldn't be in business. You both have your own businesses and just talk about about your own specific businesses, but not team up together. It almost always fails. Like literally it almost always fails. And so that's the first one. The second thing is that those jump into bed together partnerships don't have step number 2, which is you don't have a contract, you don't have terms, you don't have an agreement. And the reason is because you're so afraid of like messing up the vibe. We don't operate that way. You will when it gets up at the end. But I'm telling you right now, I now, even when I have somebody who approaches me and says, hey, like, will you take a percentage of my company? Can you coach me through this? Blah, blah, blah. I say, let's go through the lawyers first. All right. Because the thing is you get to see how this person acts under stress, because it is stressful, because inherently you're going to disagree on things. And so this is the perfect time for you to go kind of get a simulation of that. Well, it's like, well, what happens if you don't want to work and I want to work? What happens if you leave? What happens if I don't want to do this anymore? Like, you have to go through all the scenarios and get a good lawyer. And you should really have 2 that represent you. If you don't have the money for that, then get somebody to just counsel you on, you can Google a standard partnership agreement. Their templates are free online, and you can pay one lawyer for 1 hour of time to at least say, these are the things you should look for. Now, decide amongst yourselves. And so you can represent yourself in your partnership, agreement, but you have to have the agreement and you have to spell it out in clear terms. Because if you don't have that, it's the bedrock of good communication and expectations, right? Like otherwise, usually, like most relationships, partnerships end because of unmet and unspoken expectations. Like, well, I thought you were going to do this. It's like, well, I didn't know. But no one even says that because they can't communicate. So first is you probably shouldn't just jump together with somebody because they're just like you. If you are going to do that, then you should make sure that you have contracts in place. And then finally, what I want to do is kind of explain to you what the 3 main roles that exist in a business are, okay? The 3 pillars. All right, I want to see if I have a tripod here. All right, here we go. Here's my tripod, all right? So there's 3 pillars to every business, all right? The first is acquisition, which is the rainmaker, or somebody who's going to bring in business. So that's marketing and sales, all right? Acquisition, the money getter, all right? The second of these is the product, which is what you are actually selling. It's the fulfillment, it's the service, it's the widget, it's the whatever, somebody who knows how to deliver it, all right? And then third, you have the operations, which is everything else that has to happen in the company. Paying payroll, paying taxes, making sure legal and contracts and IT and finance and all like your accounting, all of that stuff, HR has to happen, right? And so these are the 3 legs of every business. Now, they're not necessarily equally weighted, and it's an important point, right? Like a lot of times there are good operators that you can get for significantly less, and many times not even equity, because there are more of them, right? Now, rainmaking, being able to bring in business, is a very highly valued skill in the marketplace. On the flip side, having the product that you're going to sell is also very valuable. Now, this is why skill stacking is so important. If you can have multiple of these skills, then you have 2 or all 3 of the legs, right? Now, these are the roles that have to exist. It doesn't mean you have to be partners with these people, but you have to have all 3 of these things for your business to stand up. And so, for example, within the company, I'll walk through my roles within each of the companies that I own. And so, the first is Gym Launch, right? So in Gym Launch, I am both the acquisition and the product, right? Or that was my founding role within the company. Layla, my wife, ran all the operations. So everything else. So like I said, IT, billing, legal, finance, HR, all of that stuff that had to happen, she took care of, right? Super important. But because of that, we had all 3 legs of the stool and we were able to build a business, right? If you're missing one of the legs, it's not going to work, right? This is where this is really dangerous, is like a lot of the marketing people that are in this world are really good promoters. They can get people in, they can sell them. But then they have no fulfillment. They have no thing, right? And then they have no one who's organized. And so everything, like you send emails in, you try and get help and they don't respond. It's because they just don't have the other pieces. I don't think it's because they're bad intentioned. I think they just don't have the skill. And so you have to have all 3. And so if you're going to bring someone in, you need them to have one of those things, right? Now, you can start a business and own all of it and just make sure that you fill the roles of those people. But as you're thinking through it, those are the roles. So if you're going to bring partners in the beginning, you want to be clear about what it is that they're bringing to the table. Now, if they're one of those 3, right, then that's a clearly defined role. And then at that point, that's what you can lay out in your agreement, and then you can argue about or negotiate whatever equity if you're doing this in the beginning. But if you've already started, at that point, then you can look at the 3 legs of the stool and see where am I lacking, right? And so for most of you guys who are listening, most people who follow me are on the or like the promotion side, so they like the acquisition side. Then what you need to do is find a strong operator, all right? And depending on what you're selling, if you know the thing that you're selling, then you can basically be product and acquisition and have a strong second to help you fulfill on those things and basically don't go to jail, right? And file your taxes and all the other stuff. And so when I'm thinking about partnerships and when I have younger guys who are coming in, many times after having discussions with me and then talking to them each other, they realize that they have the exact same role, they like the same things, and one of them is not necessary. And so they oftentimes split. And that's not a bad thing, right? It's better to recognize an error early than to recognize an error late. All right, and so you may be in one of these partnerships where you're like, we kind of both do the same thing. We kind of just overlap on everything. It's like, yeah, that's just 2 people working the same thing. And so it's not like you don't want to just be like, oh, here's all this work, I'll do half, you do half. That's not a good partnership. You have to figure out what are the things I am good at, what are the things you are good at, and then we draw a line on the board, and everything on that side you own. And everything on this side I own, and I'm responsible for it, because if everyone's responsible for everything, no one's responsible for anything, right? And then nothing's gonna get done, and then you can never know who to blame, and someday you're like, well, he takes out the trash, or sometimes I take out the trash, and we're just like kind of a get it done type of, stupid. There's no big business that works that way. All right, and so even if you are small, you need to start thinking big to become big, right? So you got to do the actions before you get the results. You have to have the beliefs before you get the outcomes of a bigger business to become a bigger business. And the reason most businesses stay small is because they think small and they act small. So they stay that way because the outcome of what they're doing is the result of the actions they're making, which are small, right? And so right now, if you're in a partnership, if you don't have a partnership and you're thinking about starting a business, I would definitely try and just acquire the skills myself, get going, and then the first hire I'm going to have is going to be a strong operational second. All right? It's the first thing I'm going to do. If you are in a partnership, you need to put all the activities that you do on a board. I do this when I do consulting stuff. But all the activities that happen in the business on a board. If you don't know what it is, you do a time study, which means you write down every 15 minutes what you do in a week, right? Because you probably don't know because you're scattered all over the place. So if you write it all down and you both bring it to each other and you put it on a whiteboard or put it on a board, then what you can do is say, okay, these are all the things, these are all the activities that happen in our business. Let's divide these out and say who owns these, all right? And that's the very beginning of an organization because you are becoming organized. You are creating roles and responsibilities. You are creating specialization of skills, which is what moved humanity forward. Specialization is a good thing, right? And so at the very beginning, you get all of it on there and you can divide it out and you can divide it based on the skills of the person. If you both have the same skills, then either you need to decide, okay, well, I'm going to become a specialist in this and you're going to become a specialist in this, or we shouldn't be doing this business together and you should do a business that's just like mine or something else, and you should be that role for that company and you should find a second just like I will. All right. And oftentimes, if you can even at least think that way, then you don't liquidate the most valuable thing in the whole world, which is your equity. All right. Because if your thing actually does grow, if your business actually does grow, then the biggest dilution of how much money you're going to make is that first decision when you started, when you just decided just right off the bat to give half of everything away.
Rule number 8, build passive income.
First off, I'm a big believer in continuing to take dividends out of a business as it continues to grow. And that's because you want to decrease your downside risk, right? Because for some reason, and the statistics are very likely that the business will not succeed in the long term. 90% or 95% of businesses fail within 5 years. And so it's much better, in my opinion, to consistently take money out of the business as you're growing it because there's a very high likelihood that it will not stick around, A. And B, many entrepreneurs have this idea that they're going to sell their business for some magical number sometime in the future, when in reality only 1% of businesses ever sell. And so if that is the case, again, well, I would rather not stack the chips on a 91-to-1 bet. It does happen, but the likelihood is low. And so I would like to take chips off the table on a regular basis. So that is the first part, which is making sure that we're taking money out. But the second question is, okay, well, now that I have this money, this 500, this million, this whatever, what should I do with it, right? And so one of the big things is I just like to think about this through the lens of opportunity cost, which is if I'm currently making, let's say, $500,000 a year, right, from my business in net free cash flow, that's owner earnings, what I get to take out of the business after reinvesting in the growth and competitive advantage that we need to continue to maintain to grow, right? So if I have $500,000 of net free cash flow that's coming to me, and let's say I've got $1 million saved up, if I were to passively invest that, I should get about 10%-ish a year, right? That's just going to be investing through indexes like the S&P 500, et cetera, right? If I'm doing that, then the advantage of actively investing might be the marginal difference. It might be an extra 5 or 10%. So that'd be a 50 to 100% increase, because 10 to 15% is a 50% increase, right? But if I look at it in terms of real terms, just purely on how much my net worth is going to increase, which is the lens that we have to look at this through, which is the opportunity cost. If I were to spend half of my time thinking about actively investing, because it will take up half your mind space, I promise you, because I've done this mistake before, I made this mistake before, then what happens is your active income will fall at a disproportionate rate compared to what your money is making you. So I'll walk you through a numbers example. So let's say you've got that $1 million and you can get 10% a year, which is 100 grand on 100% passively, right? But the additional 50% or $100,000 a year, $50 to $100,000 a year, which would be 5 to 10% of that million, right? You could get through actively investing. Well, if you're currently making $500,000 a year from your business, do you think it would be reasonable to take half or 25% of your time to go chase that when you could probably get your income from 500 to 750,000 in the next year, 500 to $1 million? And so for me, that was always the opportunity cost of actively investing, which until my wealth became so large that I felt like it was the opportunity cost of the money that I should be making by paying more attention to my money was going to outpace my income, which is still almost not there. And so for me, that is why, as for entrepreneurs, it's my belief that A, you should be ripping out cash on a regular basis, because that's downside risk protection. It's not your upside. It is downside protection. It's the fact that what if my business does not succeed? As much as I'm a big believer in being optimistic, you also have to face reality and confront facts, which is the likelihood that this particular business that you're on, I've had 13 businesses that I've started up to this point, and now I own 8 more. The likelihood that the business that you start is going to be the one that you finish with is extremely, extremely, extremely low, right? Extremely low. And the likelihood that you're going to sell that business for a big number is extremely, extremely, extremely low. And so you take this money out and you put it into the S&P or you put it into an index because it is passive and you can put it there, and the idea is that you never have to think about it again. Now, the amount of money that you should keep in cash, in my belief, is you should have about 6 months, 2 years worth of normal living that's saved up in cash. And that's just so that you can sleep well at night, and that's it. The other thing is that when you invest that into indexes and whatnot, you can always take a loan against those assets if you wanted to start something big. So it's not like it's illiquid when it's there. You can take loans against those assets at 60 or 70% loan to value, meaning if you have $1 million in assets in the S&P, most banks will give you 60 to 70% of that, or at least 50, right? Depending on the stocks and in your history with them, et cetera. That they'll give you basically for free, right? They'll give you at 1% or 2% money that you can go and reinvest in starting another business or buy a piece of real estate or whatever, right? And so for entrepreneurs, it is my belief that you should be investing most of your time and energy, or almost 100% of your time and energy, in growing your income, growing the main vehicle you have, but extracting the money and putting it into a low brain vehicle that's not active, that's passive, that's truly passive, not real estate flipping, that's not passive, right? Truly passive. If you're in crypto, right, or you have some speculative stuff that you want to get into, it's probably taking up way more of your attention than it should be, and it's actually going to make your main income suffer, which means your net worth will grow more slowly than it otherwise would. So it's all about the opportunity cost of your attention. All right, now I'm going to put this special note out here for employees. If the primary objective of the employee, in my opinion, is to increase how much your income is. And so all of yours, and this goes for entrepreneurs too, the initial parts of your investment should be growing to increase your skills, because that increases your basis. That increases your basic income that you can continue to yield from the marketplace based on your skill set. And so this is where I think people step all over dollars to pick up pennies. If you were saving, $500 a month, there's nothing wrong with that. But I would be actively investing that $500 or the $1,000 or $2,000 a month in the beginning into making my skills more valuable, because I know that if I do that, in 2 years I might quadruple my income. Because that's the thing, is that your ability to earn is one of the greatest investments. That's not just a billionaire saying. It really is. You get, if you develop the skill of selling, which might take you 2 years, you can go from making $60,000 a year to $250,000 a year or $500,000 a year, which puts you in the top 1% just by earning that one skill. And so if you can develop that skill, it is worth the investment. And most investments in self-improvement are so disproportionately low that it is worth the investment. Even if there are courses that you only get a handful of things from, you are still, as yourself an asset, more valuable. At the end of the day, you are the source. You're the source of where all the money comes from. So it's like when people don't invest in themselves, it makes no sense to me. I've spent every dollar I possibly could gaining access, getting mentorship, getting coaching, getting programs, buying courses, buying books, and doing that stuff because I'm the source, right? And if I can improve me as the machine that generates all the flow of income, then the rest of the stuff becomes easy, right? And so first and foremost, you have to invest in that. After you have an excess of that, then start pulling the dividends out of the business that you have and investing those things that are passive, not active. And then at the point where your net worth from your investable assets, what 10% of that net worth growth would be is in excess of what you make per year, then at that point it makes sense to start shifting your perspective towards managing wealth and growing wealth rather than growing income.
Rule number 9, stop limiting yourself.
A lot of people struggle with this, which is they believe that they are inherently bad at things because they are not good at them. And I think that that is an incredibly dangerous belief set to have. And so what I want to do is kind of break that belief set down to hopefully break it for you. So I think one of the most valuable beliefs, because, in terms of building on success, in my opinion, first you need to develop skills. Then you need to develop character traits to make sure that you do those skills. And then you have to make sure that your beliefs are correct so that you can open up the world, right? But the beliefs are kind of imbued throughout the entire process, because if you don't believe you can acquire a skill, you never will, right? If you don't believe you can have a character trait, you never will. And so I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who's looking to, switch career paths. She's trying to figure out, she wasn't making as much money as she wanted to make. And the issue that she was dealing with, she's like, she just doesn't have a valuable enough skill set, right? And she's like, I want to make this much money. And I was like, well, you're never going to do that doing what you're doing, right? And I was like, have you considered learning how to sell, right? I mean, because if you sell, you have a far, if you still have the desire for security, but if you know how to sell, you can, pretty much write your own paycheck if you know where to look. And she was like, I'm not good at sales. I'm not a salesperson. And I was like, well, how many hours of sales training have you gone through? She was like, well, none. And I was like, well, then why would it be reasonable for you to be good at sales, right? Like that doesn't make any sense. Of course you're not good at sales. Like you haven't done it, right? Well, it's the same thing. Like, well, I'm not a very marketing type person. I was like, well, how many courses have you gone through? How many hours a day do you spend studying marketing? Well, none. Well, then why is it reasonable that why would it would be unreasonable for you to be good at this skill given the amount of investment you've made, right? And so it's this recurring thing that I've seen over and over and over again, and it presents itself in different ways. Like I'll speak at some event or something, and I'll start getting into very basic math about business, just business math, like how much does it cost to acquire a customer, what's the lifetime value, things like that. And I can see people starting to freak out because they're like, I'm not good at math. And I have to lean back or lean pressure onto that belief, because one, that's a belief that will literally never serve you. It's like saying I hate employees. It's like, well, good luck owning a business that you want to grow to any appreciable scale, right? But with the math example, you can massively succeed in business knowing only not even algebra, just basic multiplication, subtraction, division. Like if you just know how to do that, that's all you need to do. And just about everyone knows how to do those things. And at the very least has a calculator who can do multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. That's it. That's all you literally need. And the thing is that people mistake that they are bad at math when in reality they do not understand the concepts that create the math, right? Cost per acquisition, right? Okay, that's a math statement just expressed in words. And so everyone gets tripped up and then they say, I'm bad at math, when in reality, they just don't understand the term. And by doing that, they inherently limit themselves from learning because they have this checkbox in their head that as soon as it gets difficult, they say, I'm bad at this. I am bad at this. I identify with being poor at this thing and therefore will never succeed at this thing that's a requirement for being successful. And so I think that for me, one of the cornerstone beliefs that has helped me a tremendous amount, I just want to share it with you, is that if someone can, therefore I can. And sure, does that necessarily mean that you're going to go to Mars? It's like no one's ever done that before. I think that's a next level belief. No one's ever done it, and I'm going to be the first, right? But I think if you can at least just believe that if someone has done it,
It is therefore possible, and therefore I can do it too if I do the same things. And the nice thing about actions is that they are agnostic to your level of deservingness and skill. What I mean by that is, if you spend an hour a day practicing sales, over a year, you will likely be in the top 10%, 5%, 2% of people, because most people do nothing. Most people do absolutely nothing except for deal with their emotions on a regular basis and procrastinate and give themselves reason for why they are not successful, besides the obvious one, which is that it is not reasonable that they would be successful given the amount of time and effort they've put in to achieving it. And so the only reason for this is because I had that conversation. I spoke at the mastermind where the girl talked about not understanding the math. And there's just so many repeated events like this where it's like, can you ask yourself with reason, would it be reasonable for me to be good at this skill given the investment I've made? And as a corollary, as an antithesis to that example, I've got an 18-year-old kid who lives across the street from me, and I sort of semi-mentor him. He's a good kid. He works super hard, a lot of hustle. And the thing is he's too young to know that he can't do things yet. And what that does is it makes him incredibly dangerous because he hasn't been slapped in the face by the world yet. And so he believes that he can accomplish anything. He has no reason to think otherwise. And so I've been actively trying to speak that into him. And now he's wholesaling real estate right now. He's 18 years old, right? I love this, right? And how did he do it? He watched YouTube videos for free, right? And then he picked up cold calling because I was like, this is a book you need to read for cold calling. And so he just started cold calling based on what the YouTube videos said off of a free list that he found on the internet, and he closed his first deal as 18-year-old. And so does he have an inherent skill? No. But what I did was I prepared him mentally by saying, like, you're going to suck at this for a very, very long time. And eventually, after doing it so many times, it will be unreasonable for you to suck. And at that point, you will be good. Right? And so I think if we can all approach the skills that we feel like we are deficient in with that kind of concept of course I am going to suck. It would not be reasonable for me to be good. But if I do these actions, it would over time be unreasonable for me to be bad at these things. And I think by doing that, you unlock a different ability to learn and by extension, grow. And so anyways, I hope you find this valuable. It's a belief set that I find repeated, especially in people who are smaller business owners who are getting started, etc. And it drives me nuts because it's just saying that you can't do something before you've even started. And that's why people spend so long in the beginner stage, is because they inherently dispel away their ability to learn and get better. Because they say, well, I'm not good at that. Well, obviously you're not good at that. You have not done it. Duh.
And rule number 10, the last one before some very special bonus clips, is align with your authentic self.
I think first off, if you redefine the term from happiness, which is based on outside circumstances, you are happy as a reaction. Joy comes from within, which means that I can be sad and sorrowful and filled with joy. You can mourn and be joyful, because joyful is how you choose to experience the circumstances. So first, I would redefine the word that you're shooting for, right? The second thing is asking, like, but why, right? And so a lot of us want to make money because we're like, I want to, and then when we talk publicly, it's like, I want to leave a legacy, I want to leave an impact, blah, 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 right? All that stuff. I want to help people. But the reality is that everything that you do that is external achievement is ephemeral. And what it means is it literally only exists on the physical plane, and that physical plane is temporary, which means it will end, which means that all of the achievements and all the things that you're doing on this plane, literally by definition, will have no lasting impact. And so if it means that nothing that you do, all the things that you accomplish and all the things, or rather the wealth that you accumulate, will eventually disappear, it changes the perspective somewhat. And so the way that I like to think about it is the analogy of a casino. And so I think all of us are given a token when when we come of age and start to get into the game, and we sit down at a table and we play and we play and we play and we play. And the players around the table are bragging about how big their chips are. Some players win, some players lose, and more chips get stacked, right? But the difference between that casino and the casino of life is that at the end of the day, you leave the table with your chips still on it and you don't cash out. And then everyone takes the chips that you had there. So you're playing a fake game with fake money. And so I think when you realize that, like, you can buy a castle, you can buy a house, and there's a person in India who has no shoes, who has more joy in their life. You realize that none of the things that we do to accomplish serve any real meaning whatsoever. They really just act as the shovel that we use to dig the holes that we're going to fill back up at the end of the day when we die. And so it's like, what shovel do you want to use to dig your hole? And so I like to think of those things as, what things do I inherently find joy in? And so for me, I enjoy learning, and I learn through teaching. And so that is how I derive meaning. And the only thing that I can dedicate my life to that is eternal are things that will last past the physical plane, which are values. And so if you can shift your decision-making process from outcome-based decision-making process to value-based decision-making process, you'll always feel in alignment with your identity. And so for me, when I experience alignment between what I truly believe, what I say, and what I do, I feel like I'm acting in the way that is in alignment with who I am. And so I think that a lot of us have made decisions or say things that are contrary to what we believe, or we do things that are contrary to what we say. We do things contrary to what we think, and we experience dissonance. And that's most of our lives. And so I think that if you can free yourself into thinking, I believe these things to be true, I say them with certainty, and my life is a reflection of those things, which I believe to be meaningful. And I can dedicate my life to that eternal value, and that value will exist after I die. And so that for me is kind of where I derive meaning from work.
We think that for some reason we are doing something wrong when we are not self-caring, because it is bad to not self-care, because we should, we must, or else, or what? And the reason this pisses me off, the reason that I made a tweet that went viral this morning about this, is that weekends are new for humans. They're not even 100 years old. 1929 in England is when the first weekend got passed by a union. And it's because people hated what they were doing for their life. And so if you want to truly give self-care, then stop hating what you do every day. Novel concept, I know. Stop hanging out with people that suck. Mind-blowing, like I said, I know. And the reason that I am so passionate about this is that I have been told throughout my entire life that I was working too much, I was not balancing the things that I was supposed to be balancing. And you know what? Who gives a shit? It's my life. I don't need to live by anyone else's rules, and neither do you, right? And so when people say you should be doing this, you are not doing X, Y, Z, just take a pause and be like, are these rules that I want to listen to? Are those your rules that you're trying to apply to my life? Because there are no rules. You can do whatever the hell you want. If you want to work for a year straight, work for a year straight. And the reason you can work for a year straight is because you like what you do. The reason these people try and project their own self-hatred for their own lives onto you is because they cannot imagine a world in which someone might actually like what they do every day and don't need an escape, a break from what their existence is on a daily basis. And so don't feel guilty for just being you. And if you don't like your life every day, rather than try and figure out and make time for self-care, it would probably be better to flip the ratio and start thinking, what can I do in my actual life to stop hating it so much that I need an escape from it, right? And that's different from like, yes, you need to sleep. Yes, you need to, rest, etc. But there's a difference between that and like, I just need a total spa day. And if that's how you relax, cool. But the thing is projecting on someone else how they should, must, need to, have to relax or do whatever, it's nonsensical. It doesn't exist, right? I wanted to make this video, even though it's short, because it just drives me bananas. If you want to work, work. If you want to take off, take off. Just don't listen to what anyone else says about what you should do for your life. You're going to die and so will they. And it's not going to matter. And in 10 generations, don't even remember your name. So do what you want. You're going to die. And that is the ultimate freedom. And for some reason, we live under these chains that we think exist, but don't. And so I think the process of growing and really making ourselves free is just simply identifying the things that don't really exist and only existed in our mind to begin with. And I think that's why self-care really bugs the shit out of me, or this whole self-care movement. It's also soft as like, just work, right? Just get it done. You need to like give yourself a bubble bath every day because like your work's so hard. Like humans have been here a very long time. We've dealt with much, much harder shit. Your, boss having a deadline the next day is not the worst that you've been through. And so as a final sign off on this, think about the hardest things that you have been through in your life. Everyone has gone through hardship. Everyone has had difficulties in childhood. Everyone has had difficulties with siblings, with parents, blah, 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 these events that shape our lives. You have been through harder shit than this. You will survive. It will be okay. You don't need to self-care. You don't need to listen to what anyone else is saying. You do you. And if that means self-care, by all means, but just don't project it on anyone else.
Most business strategies are not complicated. Find something people want, charge a lot of money for it, and deliver that thing really well, so much so that they tell other people about your product. It's not overwhelmingly complex to consider. The execution is difficult, but the concept is not. And so a lot of people think they're going to win on strategy when they're starting a business, when you could have two people who have lawn care companies and one person has a lawn care company worth $1 billion and one person that can barely break $5,000 a month. It's not because the strategy is significantly different, it's just the execution. How is it that an entrepreneur or two entrepreneurs can start at the exact same time and one can get 10, 20, 30 times faster? Or when you start over again, you can always skip these steps to get to your level of incompetence. My theory around this comes down to pattern recognition. And let me explain. It's not just pattern recognition from the perspective that you have strategies or something that you're recognizing, but actually patterns in people. And so I'm going to give this a quick story to drive this point home. I have struggled for the last decade to find an assistant. And so it's one of the things I'm actually, a little embarrassed about, but I've gone 0 for 7 on assistants. So much so to the point that I almost kind of gave up just even trying to find an assistant. And until recently, every time I had an assistant, it just always right off the bat, it just never felt like right. And I always was like, yeah, maybe it'll get better. And they just never really did. And the problem was that I didn't know what it looks like when it's right. And so in the videos that I talk about, I use the term ideal scene. I don't know what the ideal scene of this dynamic looks like. When we are scaling companies, right? And I'll tell you what I found out there in a second, but like when we're scaling companies, what we have to do is pay down ignorance tax of knowing what ideal scene looks like, which is where speed comes from, having people who have outside eyes look in who already do know what ideal scene looks like, so you can skip steps faster. And so I'll give you an example of what this looks like in real life. Like for me, in the role of executive assistant, thank God that like for me, it wasn't a necessary thing to continue to grow the businesses. Now that I have one, I don't ever really want to live life without one. But the entire time I kept bringing people in. I didn't know what to look for. We do hiring, we do a hiring process. We do an onboarding and training process. They never really got up to speed, or we never really got in sync. And then I'd slowly kind of fall away. There would be distance, and then it became kind of awkward. And then I would end up having to cut the relationship. And so in this instance, we immediately synced up. I really like the person. I trust the person, and they are so proactive in all aspects of my life that I just sit down and start working. And then she places things in front of me. I'm like, hey, I got 13 minutes. She's like, cool, do this. And I'm like, oh, I've got, 18 minutes here. She's like, cool, do this and do this. And every time I'm done, I'm like, hey, what else should I do? And she's like, boom. And so we meet based on the priorities that I have. And then she has this big stack and knows how long every one of these things takes, because I talked to her about how long I think the task will take. And then as I have openings, we slot it in. So it's like I wake up and I'm just crushing work until the end of the day, because I know that the amount of time that's been allotted for each of the tasks is the appropriate amount of time. And if I do finish early, I get another task done, right? And so we can crush stuff. When I started in this business, I took every single sale, and it was because I was so afraid that somebody would waste the opportunity. So if you have that fear, I understand where you're coming from. Second, when I had my first sale that was not me, I just had this emotional breakdown, because I was like, oh my God, this could actually happen. And I promise you, if you haven't had it happen yet, you will when it does, because you realize that this business can actually work without you, and other people can make it rain too, right? And then I'll tell you a quick story that illustrates the next point that I'm gonna make. So as I, hired some salespeople, now that first salesperson, were they exceptional? No, but they were able to get the job done. Later on, I had my first kind of like killer. And his name was Mario Negretti. And he came in, I don't know, a year into the business. And he so quickly was able to assume the sales role. And to show you how laughable this is, he started, and I was about to start training him, and some lady walked in the door, and I was like, hey man, like I can take it. He's like, no, I'm good. He's like, go do your thing. He's like, fitness, nutrition, accountability. I'll figure it out. And he ended up closing this first lady who walked in the door for paid in full. And I remember walking in like completely dumbstruck. I was like, he didn't even know what the pitch was. But she walked out giggling, happy, so excited to start. And what that moment taught me was that it is good to train salespeople, but it's better to take great salespeople and then just point them in a direction. And so this has informed a lot of the thinking that I have around talent in general. And I'll tell you a couple of frameworks that have informed this. But like, if you look at Harvard, Harvard doesn't produce the smartest people. They select the smartest people. And then they put smart professors in front of them, but like the base level of intelligence of everyone who's at Harvard is already exceptionally high. And so like, even if the teachers at Harvard were not exceptional, the students are, and they would be successful independent of that because their selection is so ridiculous, right? And so if we can think about our own companies that way, and especially if you're in the service business, like look at the biggest service companies out there. Like look at McKinsey, look at Bain, look at BCG, look at basically a lot of the finance world are service-based businesses a lot of times, right? And they're able to do that because they create such a pool to select from that they are able to skim for the best talent, right? I heard this quote from Esther Cathy, who's the founder of Chick-fil-A, you win the championship in the draft. And so it was such a belief that they had about picking the right people, even more so than training. And I would say that I have moved in that direction of a little bit more nature than nurture when it comes to roles, specifically sales especially. There are certain characteristics about building rapport, about having certain, dynamics or energy, whatever you want to say, that like Mario Negretti, when he walked in, he had all of these things and he didn't even know the pitch, but he won that sale off of just pure rapport. And so if I'm going to allocate the same level of time to training somebody, I might as well start with somebody who has a much higher base, because I could spend 10 hours to take someone from a 2 to a 4.5, or I could spend the same 10 hours taking someone from a 6 to a 9. And the thing is, I'm also going to get more bang for my buck in terms of my hours of training with somebody who has a natural proclivity for selling compared to somebody who does not. What's interesting about this, and this is just like my observation, is that you just have to be willing to talk to more people in the recruiting process. I will say, like, from a recruiting standpoint, there's two kind of things to look out for. If you cannot pay super handsomely based on your price points, which you need to maybe fix later. But like, if you can't pay super well for the salesperson, then you need to look harder and you'll need to interview more people and you'll need to probably run ads and use your network. If you can pay well, the best salespeople are already employed. And so it comes down to recruiting those salespeople from other sales jobs, ideally from companies just like yours, so that they already know a lot of the things coming into it. So it decreases the ramp up time for them, because all we're really doing is swapping products, and the actual sales cycle, the type of sale, is it a transactional sale? Is it a long sale? Is it a software sale? Is it a coaching program sale? Whatever it is, right? There's so few variables that we're changing that they can immediately jump and go, which also allows you to make a judgment on their proficiency faster. And so as a quick side note to this, because this is something that I've given a lot of thought, if you look at the top salespeople and sales trainers, and this is going to drive home the point that I was making earlier about it being, much of it being born, all right, is that if you look at the top people who are in the space, you look at Jordan Belfort, right? You look at Bradley, you look at, and some people would say me in terms from a selling perspective. All the guys that I know who have taught sales were exceptional salespeople day one. Brad Lee started selling cars when he was 18 years old and was the top salesman at 18 years old when he started. And he was like, I just found something I was really good at. Jordan Belfort talks about how he didn't know how to train anybody in his book. And then all of a sudden he, for the first time ever, wrote out a framework to explain the straight line sales system, which became his book and all that kind of stuff. But he, up to that point, it was just what he naturally did, right? And I can tell you in my instance as well, I'd already closed thousands of deals before I even consumed my first sales training. And so like, I do think that if we are selecting salespeople, I think it's much more about selection than it is about training. The training is to remind them how good they are, not necessarily to make them good. All right, and this is something that has shifted over time for me specifically. Now, if you're like, well, I suck at sales, you can absolutely put way more time into yourself than a business would reasonably put into an employee. All right, like you have you all the time. So you can train you in all your off hours and you're spending your own time to invest in yourself. But from a return on investment perspective, it's the cost of finding a good salesperson compared to the cost of training a bad or mediocre salesperson is significantly lower. It's much easier to find the right people than it is to take somebody and then make such a crazy extensive training, unless your entire model is, we just take on every single person who walks in the door. Like 24 Hour Fitness has this model. They take on anybody who has a pulse, and then they put them through a ridiculous culling process, and then 10% of people make it in the first 90 days. I've said this quote many times in our communities and on this channel, which is, you must outwork your self-doubt. right? If you feel like you are not confident, then you must outwork the things that you're insecure about. If you're like, man, I'm selling these services and I'm not sure if I'm that good at them, then do more of them and don't pretend. Honesty is one of the most compelling and convicting things for persuading people, right? Saying what you are good at and what you are not good at truthfully will win you far more followers and fans and loyal customers and loyal employees than pretending. Because at the end of the day, they can feel that you are disingenuous because they know that it is hollow. They know that on the inside, you do not believe the words that are coming out of your mouth. And that is how people speak without conviction, and they cannot sway others because they have not swayed themselves, because they have lost their own respect. And so I am not the believer in buying the Ferrari when you can't afford it. I am not the believer in affording the home and paying for the home that you cannot afford because you want to pretend like this is the lifestyle that you want to be around. If you go under the guise of networking, you can still go to those places without buying a $4 million house when you're barely making, a few $100,000 a year. It doesn't make sense. I like Jay-Z's quote around this, which is, if you can't buy something twice, don't buy it once. I really like that. And so this is one of the most common questions I get from newer entrepreneurs, because they think that they have to pose on Instagram in order to get wealthy. And what it does is it conflates sequence. Jeff Bezos is famous because of what he did, not because he became famous as Jeff Bezos and then used his following to build something. Elon Musk is famous for what he's accomplished, not for being Elon Musk and then creating something as a result, right? Let the actions be the thing that gives you the fame rather than yourself, right? At least that is Alex's 2 cents in my viewpoint on the world. And I think most of Mozi Nation, you guys share that belief with me. And for those of you who are new to this channel, you're gonna get more of this type of stuff and none of the fake it till you make it nonsense. That is a sure way to be broke. And I will tell you this as a last thing. The amount of people who in 2008, when everything crashed, who were faking it until they, quote, made it, just faked it until they lost it all. Because they lost what little amount that they had because they were so overextended. But I can tell you that just about everyone can become wealthy if you choose to live on less than you make. Right? And that is a ratio. Wealth is a ratio, not a number. All right. And so, anywho, if you are having struggles with this question, I would posit, I would beg of you that you build your own respect first, that you're honest with yourself first. And if you always maintain the integrity of, hey, last year we got smashed, right? This year, we'll do a little bit better. And 2 years from now, when you do even better than that, you can be truthful and people will believe you. But if you always are telling a story about how you're always doing so well, A, everyone will hate you. B, no one cares. And C, you will know that you are full of it. And at the end of the day, I think that is the only thing that we're going to keep with us. And when we die, everyone's going to forget about us anyways. So you might as well at least enjoy yourself while you're alive. Most people, most champions do not have something that you do not have. They lack something that you have. Or a champion in the physical realm, a lot of times it's they don't have an off switch. They just keep going. You have an off switch. Their lack of it, which is what drives their success. And so to the same degree, you probably do things every single day that you should not be doing. And so what I want to introduce to you is a concept of the anti-routine as the most productive routine that is humanly possible for you to accomplish what you want. So number one is obviously just shifting the perspective of I need to do more things and I need to add more things to my routine, when in fact you need to stop doing things that you're currently doing. All that remains is the work to be done. And then you become very clear about why you are not being effective. So number one is that priorities mean two things cannot be equally important. And here's the mentally challenging thing about this, is that when you work on something, and let's say I spend 30 minutes on this thing and I spend 30 minutes on item B. If I spend 30 minutes on both things and I say this one's more important than this one, I can say that, but that's not reality, because I basically just said they were both important, which means neither of them are, which is why most people cannot get done, because they cannot say no. A lot of people don't need new things to add to the routine. You need to have a routine of saying no, an anti-routine, and that is the thing that's going to yield those outsized returns on productivity. You can't say yes to everything, and therefore it means that you can't do two things with different levels of importance. It's either important or it's not important. If it's important, it means you say no to everything else. So if you say this is the priority, then it means you do not do other things besides that thing. That is how it is a priority. That is how you literally prioritize. I would say there are days that I feel like less energized or things like that, for sure, not about like the big picture of like, I don't believe that this cause is not worthy. But I do think a lot of people have that too, where they're like, what I'm doing is meaningless, right? And then I get into, I think everything's meaningless, and then we can just create whatever meaning, we choose to, because if we don't believe in a capital M meaning, which a lot of people disagree with, that's fine. But if you don't believe in a capital N meaning, I think that's very freeing, because then you can create a little m meaning for whatever you want. And so if you believe, you can then choose to architect your own life in whatever ways that you deem meaningful, and make the activities you do aligned with that meaning. The difference between capital M meaning and little m meaning, and this is kind of like the basis of nihilism, which people have like a very negative viewpoint around, which I'm not entirely sure about why. But like capital M meaning means that like this is the meaning of life, period. Like for everyone, this is the meaning of life. Whereas if we say that there is no single agreed upon meaning of life, and then people say, well, then that is your big meaning of life. And I'm like, yes, you're right. I believe that there is no meaning. That is the meaning that I believe. And they're like, well, then that is the capital M. Then sure, that's my capital M meaning, is that there is no meaning. What's the implication of that? It means now that we have meaning-making machines in our brain, and so we get to create and destroy meaning as we see fit. And so if we choose an activity and we deem that goal meaningful because we think it's more interesting or it energizes us, then we can ascribe meaning to that and do more of it. And what's nice about not having capital M meaning is that that can shift, right? That might be good for a season, and then it can shift. I will say that the downside of not having capital M meaning, which I consider to be religion off the shelf, is that it's more difficult because you have no one who's saying, here's the big box of rules, you can read it, and then that way you don't have to make the decisions about it. But I think it's more difficult, but ultimately more rewarding if you have reasoning behind why you believe what you believe. Because then you have to independently come up with your own conclusions about those things. It also makes it malleable so that if you get new data or new evidence, then you can change your mind, which a lot of people, again, have difficulty with. But like if you change the information, then it would make sense that if it materially changes the outcome, that the way that you believe about something should change. And I think a lot of people identify with their beliefs as a part of themselves rather than as what I prefer to call them, which is assumptions, because they work the same way. What's the difference in belief and assumption? Not a lot, right? The only difference is just what we call the word. And so assumptions are based on things that we've observed, and then we assume something as a result. And so I would say that beliefs are just assumptions, but when you call them that, they become less tied to your identity. If you have an assumption, you don't say, you challenged my assumption. It's like, well, yeah, you challenged my assumption. Oh, that's great. I was assuming this. It must be this. And then they become much more flexible, and then we don't tie our egos into them, and I think ultimately it serves more people better in the long run.
A lot of people, I would say, mistakenly think that the number one resource is time, right? Everyone's like, time is money, time is money, time is money. And I would argue that that's not necessarily true. I would argue that attention is money. That is the golden resource. So the billionaire friend that I have, he's actually been helping me on the new endeavor that we are launching to our gym lords soon, which I think will change the industry. Anyways, he's been helping me with that stuff. But like, here's an example. On his phone does not ring unless you are already a contact that has been whitelisted. His phone doesn't ring. He's impossible to reach. The more successful, the larger your company grows, the more you scale, the more you need to scale. And the only way to scale you is because you do have a finite amount of attention. And so what happens is you have to decrease all of the other things in your life that drain attention, because you can have as much time as you want, but if you're not there, you're not potent, you're not able, then you can't get anything done with that time that you're supposedly allocating, which is why a lot of people end up in this in-between state of always everywhere and at the same time nowhere, right? And so they're everywhere, but they're not paying attention to anything. And the reason that it's difficult to focus is because entrepreneurs, the character trait that made us into entrepreneurs is that we're go-getters, we're risk averse, we're creators, we're innovators, we're builders, right? We have all of those traits, but the difficulty is that the thing that gets you from 0 to 1 is not the thing that gets you from 1 to 2, right? And so one of the reason that you have to totally morph and why you have to be a growth-oriented individual is because you have to change your own individual character traits in order to progress as a business owner. And so, like I said, the things that got you here are not the things that are going to get you there. The things that got you here, which is your own internal skills, are not the things that you need to pass on to other people. So the only way that you are able to grow your business at a certain point is by growing other people, right? And the only way you can do that is if you have the attention and the bandwidth in order to do so. And that's why if you look at a business owner, and like the more I obsess on looking at billionaires and people who are doing better than we are, is I look at how quiet and how clean they keep their space. And I mean that both in a literal sense, that like their surroundings, their office, their house, their homes, their cell phone, their computers, right? It's quiet, right? Everything, like it's pristine. And when you talk to these people, there's a certain amount of tranquility that's there. And they just have very low tolerance. And it's not that they're trying to be impatient with you or impatient with the world. It's just that they understand that they have they're operating at such a high level that there's so many things that are demanding of their time and attention that they can't. And so they have to forcibly remove themselves from so many different situations. And I'm going to give you an example. So one of the people that I'm somewhat mentoring, right? They had 4 businesses, and this is something that happens so many times. Like you want $100,000 coaching. This is what happens in $100,000 coaching sessions. And I'm being honest with you. What happens is someone who's coming in, usually doing between $1 and $3 million a year, can't get past a certain point, right? And the reason they can't get past is because they only have so much attention and they have it spread between 4 or 5 different cakes. That's when the gym owner has 4 gyms and is making less money than they did when they had 1 gym, because the amount of attention that they can allocate to one facility has gone down so much that with fixed costs, they basically are breaking even, right? And so the same thing happens. Now that entrepreneur is probably making $1 to $3 million in gross revenue, but not taking anything home because they don't have the attention to actually put onto things. And so in order to grow, you need to do less. In order to grow, you need to do less. And that comes from both delegation and also choosing what not to do. The better you get, the better the opportunities that you have to say no to. Imagine the level of opportunities that we have now. I'm just being honest. So imagine how many things we could do or try and JV with or do a partnership with or whatever because of the distribution network that we have and the trust and the goodwill that we have with the gym owners that we have in our network, right? A lot. You know how many people cold message me like, I have an opportunity for you. I'm like, really? You have an opportunity for me. And so the better you get, the better your opportunities you have to say no to, which is why becoming a higher and higher and higher level entrepreneur is more and more difficult because it requires discipline. It's not about doing more, it's about doing less because we innately want to do more. So doing more of your own internal characteristic, if that was what it took to be more successful, then everyone would be more successful because it would be something that does not take effort because that is something that we already do. It's like, man, I outwork anyone. I've got all this work ethic. Cool. That gets you from 0 to 1. It's not going to get you any further than that. So stop identifying with that. It was something that I used to identify with. I was like, I'll outwork anyone, whatever. Like that was something that I used to think about. And it was a character trait. It was an identity thing. And the more you grow, the more you realize that your identity needs to be fluid because what it needs to be is exactly what it needs to be at that given time of development. Because the character traits that I'm going to have to emphasize in a year are going to be different than the ones that I have to emphasize now. The skills that you need to learn, like delegation, leadership, those are things that are not the things that take you in the beginning. You have to be independent. You have to be hustling. You have to be grinding. You have to be willing to put in the work because no one else will do it for you, especially if you have no capital to start, which most of the people who are on here are in that situation. To reel this back in, the number one thing that you have to be paying attention to is where you are paying your attention, right? Like you spend attention. That's why they call it paying attention. It's because it is a resource. And most people don't pay attention to that, right? And so one of the things that a lot of people don't know about me, this one's going to go long. Some of the things that a lot of people don't know about me is that I, for 9 months, paid a coach to teach me one thing, which was to manage my attention, was to teach me how to think. And so for 90 minutes every single day, all I did was talk about what I was thinking about. Think about that. Every day, I paid attention to where my attention was. And when I did that, all of a sudden, my business blew up, right? And I realized that I had toxic relationships. I had toxic relationships with parents. I had toxic relationships with friends or pseudo-friends, things that were taking my attention, past things that I had on my mind that I knew I had not handled. So those are called like open loops or open cycles, right? So when you have something that you like, I haven't resolved this, then you need to handle that and you'll get that attention back because what happens is you have this bowl, this tiny little bowl of marbles, and each of those marbles is a unit of attention, right? If you had to measure it. And so you put little marbles of attention on your childhood traumas. You put little marbles of attention on your marriage. You put little marbles of attention on your health. You put little marbles of attention on your spirituality, and then massive marbles of attention on your business. But the thing is that sometimes you need to quiet and collect all of these other little marbles so that you have more potency, more potential energy, more potential units of attention to spend on the one thing that you're trying to grow, which in this case would be your business. And what's interesting is that what happens is that things that were perceived as difficult become really easy. And I don't know if you've ever had this happen, but like if you were in college or you were in high school and you were like, man, I can't solve this problem, this math problem, and you were exhausted, and then you go to bed and then you wake up the next morning, and then all of a sudden it seems really easy. Or you're like, I don't know why I didn't see that before. Because attention gives you the ability to see, right? Like if you think about wisdom, right? Wisdom is an ability to see what other people cannot see, right? Two people are presented the same situation. The wiser person sees things that the other person doesn't. And how can you see better? You see better if you have more ability to see, which comes from your most valuable resource, attention. How much horsepower do you have? And so look at the things that you have in your life right now. Like if I see someone who has a messy relationship life, who's got a messy love life, who goes out every weekend and gets trashed, right? Like I can tell you, billionaires don't do that. That like the whole Tony Stark like vision of the entrepreneur is a farce. It's not true. Don't believe that. Every single billionaire, every single high-level entrepreneur is quiet, unbelievably quiet. They keep themselves completely isolated. They have a bubble around them of layers of protection. They're like for me, it's me, and then there's Layla, and then we have our COO, and then we have our executive assistant team, because we have a team of EAs at this point. We have 4 who work the next level. There's no one who has direct access to me, including our employees. No one does. And that's because it would disserve you guys, our gym owners, if everyone had access to me. The reason that I don't respond to Facebook messages is not because I don't want to. It's because I literally can't. And if I did, I would be disserving everyone, because then my attention would be split, because someone can't generate leads in their market or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, because these little things that are perceived as huge issues to you in that moment, because you have a little bit of attention, you have so little left that everything seems like an explosion. But when you have lots of capacity, big problems seem small, and small problems seem big. And it sounds reverse, because what you do is you start seeing that all of these things are attention drains, and you just say, I don't want to play anymore. And you stop playing.
Because you made it this far in a video, I want to celebrate you. Most people start and don't finish. Most people never actually follow through. Most people say they want something, but they don't ever do the work to actually get it. But you are different. You are special. Believe Nation, you made it here all the way to the end, and I love you. So as a special celebration, if you put a hashtag believe down in the comments below on this video, I will showcase you and celebrate you somewhere on the screen in a future video, because you are awesome. For 10 more amazing rules from Dean Graziosi, check the video right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
Listen, don't wait for permission from your husband, from your parents, from your children, from anyone. Remember, God gave it to you, not them. The universe gave it to you, not them. You see, I really believe sometimes our subconscious